Hey everyone, and welcome back to Build UX. In this episode, we're going to continue recreating our reference design by focusing on the icons we have throughout the UI. Although we could just reach for an icon library that roughly matches what we see here, it's super valuable to recreate these icons manually to retain their unique personality and also learn a lot about how to construct custom icons. By going through the process of rebuilding the icons, we'll find lots of great tricks for creating them quickly. And we'll be able to apply this learning in future projects where we might want to give our UI that extra polish of having custom tailored icons. So moving over to our working copy of the design, we can turn off our recreated layers to basically just show the reference layer for now. So let me disable a bunch of these layer groups so we can just restore it back to the original reference. I think we're going to start by recreating this logo, which has some of the basic techniques we'll use throughout the icons in our design. So one thing I like to do, since this logo is skewed, it's rotated, is to basically copy our reference layer. So we'll hit Ctrl or Command D there. I'm going to unlock this layer and go into the fill options here, and we can change it from fill to crop. And what this will let us do is basically crop in our reference file just down to show the logo icon that we're going to recreate. So I'm going to turn off this lower reference layer so we can see what we're doing here with the cropping. And I'm basically just going to crop in so we only have the icon portion of our logo. Okay, so that should work well for our needs here. What I'm going to do now is basically drag out a ruler on the top and left edges here. And now we can rotate this logo to be perpendicular with our guides. So just getting things roughly adjusted here. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to recreate this with shapes in just a second here. I'm going to drag out a couple more rulers so we can just quickly get the dimensions we're wanting. Okay, so now that we have our rulers in place and our reference is rotated, let's hit R for the rectangle tool. And I'm going to drag out a rectangle that's roughly the size of that shape that we're looking for. From here, what we can do is turn on the independent corners feature, and we're going to want to adjust the top right and the bottom right border radii. So I'm going to get it to roughly match what we see here. Our height is 20, so I think anything around 10 might be good. And let's get our bottom right as well, which will also be, yep, 10 looks good there. Now the top left and the bottom left, I think just have a couple pixel border radius. So let's kind of eyeball this and see what looks best. I think around 2 pixels matches the reference pretty well. So we'll go with that. Next up, what I'm going to do is just shift this over to the right real quick. And we're going to grab our fill tool. Let's color sample this topmost color and bring that back into place. So this will be our logo icon, and this will be the top shape. Let's duplicate this and quickly drag out the lower portion of our logo, just getting it roughly positioned here. And I'm going to shift this over again once more so we can color sample the bottom portion and get this put back into position. Let's drag this layer down and rename it to be the icon bottom. Now next up, if we quickly turn off these 2 layers, you'll see that basically this relies on a transparency to create this overlap effect. Whenever I'm working with SVGs, I try to work with as flat of shapes as possible, meaning I don't really like to have transparencies in my designs, and also I don't really like to have tons of unnecessary overlap. So the technique I'm going to show here, I go into more detail in the How to Work with SVGs video, which I'll link to in the description below. But basically, we'll want to create a separate shape with this fill to basically fake this overlap effect without actually needing to rely on transparencies. So what I'm going to do is grab both the top and bottom layers. We're going to duplicate both of these. And if we turn these on real quick, we're going to go up to our Boolean group options. And we're going to want to only have the intersection between those two. And that'll form this new shape that we see here. Again, I'm going to shift this over to the side. Let's grab our fill and color sample that middle section that we're seeing. And if we put this back into place and turn on the other logo icon layers, we can turn off a reference real quick. And you'll see that we're basically faking that overlay effect. Now to take things one step further, what I'd like to do is take this intersect and cut it out of both the top and bottom layers. That way there's no actual overlap in the paths that we established. So before I do that, I think I can confidently go into this intersect layer and let's flatten it down. And let's rename this to logo icon, and this will just be the middle section. I'm going to use this to punch out a shape from both the top and bottom. So I'm going to need to duplicate this a couple times real quick. So with one of the duplicated layers, I'm going to also select the top as a start, and we'll go back to our Boolean operations and subtract the selection. So if we were to turn off the remaining layers, you'll see that we have this nice cutout that represents the top of that icon. So let's rename this. We'll have to bring back that naming of logo icon top. And again, I'm going to flatten it down because I know I'm confident committing to this shape. We're going to use this extra copy of the middle layer now to do the same thing with the bottom. So we already have subtract selection active here. We can click that. Now we'll see that we have this bottom portion. So let's go ahead and rename this to logo icon bottom. And we can also flatten this. We can hit Control or Command E to flatten more directly as well. Okay, get these arranged. And now you can see that with all of these turned on, it basically looks like there's that overlap, but we don't have any actual overlap in the paths, which means that our SVG is going to be nice and simple to work with. Okay, so let's group these layers and we'll just call it the logo icon. Next up, let's bring that reference layer back. The original reference, actually, we can get rid of this cropped version because I think we want to get rid of our rulers just by clicking on them and deleting them, and turn on our actual design reference. And this way we can grab our logo icon group and rotate it until it matches the design that we're looking at here. So maybe around 18 degrees of rotation is looking pretty good. We can always adjust this in the future. Cool, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to turn on my sidebar layer temporarily, just so we hide the original design beneath it. And let's drag this logo icon into our actual logo group here. Cool, so that's looking good. It matches our reference design, but now we have a live version that we can use to export SVGs and adjust things as needed in the future. So with that taken care of, I'm going to turn off our sidebar layer once more. And now we can start turning our attention to these UI icons that we see throughout the design. So up here in the header, we have the search icon as well as folder, notification, and email icon. And we'll focus on building out the header icons first and then move our way through the rest of the UI. So what we're going to start seeing as we rebuild these UI icons is that most icons, even if they look fairly complex, are actually composed of simple shapes. And so don't be intimidated by seeing some of the icons we're going to build. After we get kind of the basics of adding shapes together and applying strokes, you'll see that it's actually pretty quick and easy. So let's first tackle this magnifying glass icon real quick. And for this, I know I'm just going to start out with a circle. So we'll hit O for the oval tool, and holding Shift and Alt or Shift and Option, I'm going to drag out a circle from the center. We're not going to have any fill on it, but we will have a stroke. And I think it is a 2-pixel stroke, but we're going to have to adjust that as we go. So this might actually be a little bit too large now that we have this stroke applied. So let's constrain the proportions and maybe nudge this down to be 18 by 18. That's looking better. Okay, now I'm going to shift this out of the way real quick, just so we can color sample the stroke of the original icon. That's looking good. We can get that roughly in place here. Next up, I know I'm going to have a 1 pixel by however many long rectangle to do the handle of the magnifying glass. So let's just eyeball what we need there. It might be a 1 by 8 or a 1 by 10. I think 1 by 10 might work well for us. Let's grab that same fill And this is going to be rotated by 45 degrees. And then we can just, using the arrow keys, get this roughly in place as needed. So that's looking good. I might adjust the height, or basically the length of this, down a bit to be a 1x8. And I dragged it to the corner of this circle just to make sure that it's in line with the center of the circle here. All right, so with that in place, we can start naming these independent components. So we'll just say this is icon, it'll be the search icon, and this will be the top or the ring. And then we can say the bottom layer here is just the icon search. Let's just call it the handle. So now we can group these two and call this icon search. And we'll worry about tap targets and componentizing these in a future video. For now, we're just manually recreating the design. But once we start moving towards more of a design system mentality in how we refine and recreate and evolve this design, that's when we'll think about how we componentize our UI icons and anticipate consistent container sizes, tap targets, all of that stuff. So I'm going to toggle on my header group here temporarily and drag this down to sit next to the search placeholder. All right, so with our search icon taken care of, let's turn our attention to some of these more complex icons we see at the right here. And we'll start with the folder icon that we see here. Again, we're just going to use simple shapes to create most of these icons, even if they look like they're fairly complex. So first off, I'm just going to drag out a rectangle for the body of this icon. Looks like there's a border radius that we'll want on the top right, bottom right, and the bottom left. So we can get that in place. Next up, I'm going to drag out another rectangle for this tab. And from here, I want to apply the border to the top left. So that'll be 2 pixel border radius. And I'm going to double click into the shape. We're going to grab this top right handle and set it at a 45 to form this angle that we're looking for. Now what we can do with these two shapes is use the union selection. I'm going to hit Control or Command E to flatten this. And let's rename this icon folder. This will be the body of the folder. We can turn off the fill and add a stroke, which is a 1 pixel stroke. And let's actually move this over for a second so we can color sample the reference here. Okay, now all we have to worry about is this label on the folder. So we'll want to color sample the stroke that we have in place. Let's rename this to icon folder, and this will be the label. And we can grab these two layers, group them together, rename it icon folder. Let's turn off our reference just for a second. Make sure we're happy with that icon. It's looking good. And let's pop open our header and drag this to be the first icon after the search placeholder. Okay, next up, we'll tackle this notification bell. So again, this might just be simple shapes that we add a border radius to. So this top one, let's add pretty good border radius. I think I only want to add that on the top left and right, so we can back that up a step. We'll add 2 pixels yet again. Move this over and sample the same color that we're using for these icons so far. Next up, another rectangle for the body of this notification bell. Let's get our top left established here. It looks like 8 pixels on the top left and right is what we're going to need. And then I'm guessing 2 pixels for the bottom corners. This won't have a fill. We'll bring in a 1 pixel stroke. Grab the color we need. That's looking good. And then lastly, we have this semicircle shape, which we can also do yet again with a border radius on these rectangles. So this will be the bottom right. Looks like 3 pixels is the maximum border radius. So let's just put that on both sides. Take out the fill add our stroke, and apply the color. So if we turn off our reference layer, one thing we can see is we actually need to adjust this shape slightly. So we can just pull that side up to overlap as needed. And I think we can confidently unite these layers and flatten it down. So we'll hit Control or Command E to flatten it. And let's rename this icon bell. Bring our reference back in, and we'll drag this after the icon folder that we just created. All right, so with that, let's turn our attention to this email icon real quick. This one should be fast. 2 pixel border radius, no fill, add a stroke. This is gonna have a different stroke color, and it looks like it's actually a 2 pixel stroke for this icon. So we can color sample what we need here. Again, we don't have final colors just yet, and we'll address that once we start refining the design further. Next up, I might use the pen tool for this fold on the envelope. So I'm going to hit P for pen tool, and let's quickly get this V shape established. We want to make sure everything is nice and symmetrical. So with the whole vector path selected, let's add a round join and a round cap, and grab that same color that's applied to the rest of the envelope icon. And this is more or less what we're going for. We might finesse it further. One thing I want to evaluate is if we really want the 2 pixel stroke on this. It looks a little odd with it, so I think I might stick to 1 pixel on everything. And we can always evaluate that decision in the future. Let me scale this down and see if we like this outside dimension more. Yep, I think we'll keep it the smaller size. We can always finesse these icons further as we go. So let's say this is the icon envelope. This will be the fold. And then here we have the icon envelope body. Group these together to be icon envelope. And then we can work on this little notification dot that we see here. So we can hit O for the circle or oval tool, holding Shift and Alt or Shift and Option. We're going to drag this out from the center. Looks like this is a 10 by 10. We can nudge this over to the right. I'm going to turn off this icon just for now. And we'll want to apply a gradient fill. So linear gradient. I'm going to pull the color stops out to the opposite corner, so it's a 45 gradient. And let's color sample the start and end points for the gradient that we're establishing here. Okay, so that's a pretty subtle gradient, but we can put that back into place. Let's call this our notification dot for now. It's not necessarily an icon as much as a component, since it does have kind of semantic purpose, but we can always reevaluate our naming as we go. And re-engaging those, let's turn off our reference layer. Things are looking good here. Let's grab these two, turn on our header, and drag them to follow the bell icon. Now with those three established, we're starting to see everything come to life and starting to see some basic rules of how these icons are constructed. I want to refine these icons further for tab targets and also maybe some more commonality in the dimensions they use, but I think this is a good start for recreating the design we see. All right, so with that established, I'm going to go through the rest of the UI and recreate the icons that we see here. I'm just going to speed the video up as I go through the rest of this, but it'll basically be the same process of creating simple shapes, applying some border radii, maybe bringing the pen tool in here and there, and getting everything matched up as needed. All right, so with those icons taken care of, I think we're gonna stop for this episode. In the next episode, what we're gonna do is basically tackle some of the tooltip bubbles that we see, handle this styling for the reminder link, which I can show you if I drag this reference up real quick. And also get the various box shadows that we see on these elements established so we can kind of figure out a system for different elevations in the UI. And once those are finished, we'll change focus to refining the spacing, sizes, and tap targets of the elements throughout the UI, as well as narrowing our color palette and type styles down to be more accessible and maintainable. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out the next episode, and we're going to make some rapid improvements to your UI so we can start planning out how to build everything in code and also anticipate creating a light UI variation of everything we see here.